Good evening. Please welcome to the stage Deborah Rudder, President of the John F. Kennedy Center for the Performing Arts.
Good evening. We got the right audience here, I can tell. I wanted to not just welcome you, but take a moment to center ourselves in the spirit of joy and gratitude. Today is one of those days that I especially love at the Kennedy Center, when we have many things happening all at once. It really comes alive, and we have new voices, unique ideas, and boundless creativity. In addition to this program this evening here, just a few moments ago, literally on the other side of that wall, we had the launch of a new installation by an AI artist, Rafik Anadol. This work is called Dvorak Dreams, inspired by the music of Antonin Dvorak, but you'll have to look hard to hear or find him in that work. It's there now until September 24th, and I hope that you will either join us there later tonight, because it's there till midnight, or come back another time. But tonight, we are here for a very, very, very important event. And as I just said to my friends and colleagues and our featured guests, it is a real privilege for us to be hosting this conversation here, being in community with you. Tonight's conversation is part of our Millennium Stage Impactful Words series. And the series is one of many that Millennium Stage presents. We have free programming every Wednesday through Saturday, and every Sunday we have free film screenings. So I hope you'll come back. Try something new, perhaps. It's easy because it's free, simple, and we're thrilled to welcome you here. With Impactful Words, we dive deeper into the written word, uncovering really truly remarkable stories of really truly remarkable people. And I hope spark some new ideas and new conversations. We'll all be in conversation after tonight, I know that. In everything we do here at the Kennedy Center, we strive to be more than a stage for artists and seats for you in the audience. Art is a platform for storytelling, opening the door for reflection, learning, conversation, building community. Our social impact programs like Millennium Stage are centered around the belief that culture holds the unique power to connect us, to create joy, inspire action, and drive meaningful change. The performing arts can be woven through our lives in so many different ways and bring so much change for ourselves and others. So this is really important work. This is the work that brings us into this building every day. It's not easy, but it is so rewarding. I'm grateful to our incredible team of programmers and curators and artists, but really the magic only happens when you are here. You ask any artist and they will tell you that the moment the art happens is when they're sharing it with an audience. So you are as important to this as any other role of the artist. We're building community, we're in community, and that's the whole concept of what the arts mean. So tonight we're going to hear from a truly remarkable leader. Maybe you've heard of her. She's the first Black woman to be appointed to the Supreme Court of the United States. My guess is that in advance of every book talk, she gets that kind of reaction, but I doubt it's for 2,000 people. So keep it up. I think she deserves it. In her memoir, Justice Brown Jackson, tells us her journey, from the impact her educator parents had on her formative years, her experience breaking barriers in the legal profession, and her ascent, of course, to this highest court in the land. And there is a really important part that I am particularly interested in about her stint in musical theater and improv comedy while she was in college. So she deserves to be on this stage. But it really is just proof that arts have the way to weave themselves throughout our lives. You never know exactly where and when. Now, Justice Jackson will be joined by the president of the Ford Foundation. Darren Walker is a visionary thought leader, an advocate for social justice. Keep it down, not as much for him as for her, okay? He's a great man. He is a truly great man, but we are here for her, remember? So for those of you who don't know, the Ford Foundation is a $16 billion international social justice foundation. And under Darren's leadership, it became the first nonprofit in US history to issue a $1 billion designated social bond in US capital markets to strengthen and stabilize nonprofits in the wake of COVID-19. Truly astounding. There are so many arts organizations and artists across this country, including the Kennedy Center, who are so grateful to Darren for his extraordinary leadership. Now, before they start on conversation, we have a special reading. So please welcome Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson to give you
Thank you. You may be seated. Thank you very much. Thank you for that wonderful introduction. Thank you all for being here. And I thought I would start by reading excerpts from the first few pages of my memoir, just to get us warmed up. A sacred trust. I had to keep reminding myself that this moment was real. It was just before noon on the 30th day of June 2022, and I was standing in front of a plain wooden door that would soon open into the Grand West Conference Room of the Supreme Court of the United States. My family was already inside. My husband, Patrick, our daughters, Talia and Layla, and my parents, Johnny and Ellery Brown, were among the family members and friends who had gathered to witness my historic swearing in. My heart was hammering so loudly that I wondered if the two black-robed men standing on either side of me, Chief Justice John G. Roberts Jr. and retiring Associate Justice Stephen G. Breyer, could hear it too. Only 2 hours before, they and the other 7 justices of the Supreme Court had issued their final decisions of the 2021-22 term. Justice Breyer, a pragmatic consensus builder, was now stepping down from that august body, having been privileged to serve as one of his law clerks more than 2 decades before. I would be stepping up in his place. I drew a deep breath to steady myself as the door in front of us swung wide open and a court officer stepped aside to allow our passage into the room. Suddenly blinded by bright lights, I took a moment to understand that the source was a bank of video cameras set up to record the ceremony. As my eyes adjusted and I processed into the chamber behind the 2 justices, I felt heartened by the sight of my loved ones beaming at me from rows of chairs on the right side of the room. Chief Justice Roberts began by warmly welcoming those present. Then he turned toward me, now assuming a ceremonial air. "Are you prepared to take the oath?" he asked, his tone more formal than it had been a moment before. "I am," I responded, in a voice that sounded firmer than I felt. Patrick positioned himself between Chief Justice Roberts and me and held out a stack of 2 Bibles. "Please raise your right hand," the Chief Justice said, and I did so briskly, simultaneously resting my left palm on the pair of holy books. On top was our ancient Jackson family Bible, its brittle pages protected by the black leather binding that Patrick had had the foresight to get refurbished in 2013 when I'd been appointed to the U.S. District Court in Washington, D.C. I had sworn every oath since then on this cherished family Bible, just as I would now swear the constitutional oath to be administered by Chief Justice Roberts, followed by the judicial oath to be given to me by Associate Justice Breyer. Nominated by President Joe Biden 4 months earlier, I, the daughter of African-American parents who had come of age in the segregated South during the 1950s and 1960s, would become the 116th Justice and the first Black woman to sit on the Supreme Court in its 233-year history. These details made the other sacred volume on which I would swear my historic oath doubly significant. Tucked beneath our family's holy book was the Harlan Bible, donated to the court in 1906 by Associate Justice John Marshall Harlan. This tome had been used for the oath-taking by every Supreme Court appointee since then. Each new justice had also signed one of the book's flyleaves after being sworn in. When the court curator brought the Bible to me in my temporary chambers later that afternoon so that I could add my own signature to the venerated roll, I thought about the justices of Harlan's era who collectively decided in the Plessy versus Ferguson opinion that state laws mandating the separation of people by race did not violate the 14th Amendment of the Constitution so long as the separate facilities were equal. Harlan had been the sole dissenter in that notorious 1896 case. And now, here I was, affixing my signature to his Bible in black fountain pen ink. Only one generation after my mother and father had experienced the spirit-crushing effects of racial segregation in housing, schooling, and transportation while growing up in Florida, their daughter was standing on the threshold of history, the embodiment of our ancestors' dreams, ascending to a position that Justice Harlan and his colleagues likely never imagined possible for someone like me. But if Justice Harlan and his contemporaries could not have pictured this moment, my family and I, and indeed most of America, were fully cognizant of the significance of my nomination and confirmation to our nation's highest court. In subsequent conversations with people from across the country, I learned that I had been carried on 1,000,000 prayers lifted up on my behalf since the day of my nomination. I also fielded an avalanche of invitations to speak or appear in person, as excited well-wishers wanted to know my story in whatever form or fashion I might be willing to tell it. How was it, they wondered, that someone with such an unusual name and from such an unconventional background came to stand in such an unprecedented place, swearing an oath on 2 stacked Bibles that symbolized how far our nation had traveled? Mine has been an unlikely journey in many respects. And of course, this book is about that journey. Thank you for your interest in my story. Thank you, and I look forward to discussing it at greater length tonight. Thank you.
Please welcome to the stage Darren Walker, President of the Ford Foundation.
Well, good evening. This madam, is a triumph. It is a remarkable memoir.
Thank you.
A woman of extraordinary character, integrity, passion, determination, and grit, who, on the one hand, it seems effortlessly ascended. But your book reveals that it actually has not been a straightforward linear journey. You are vulnerable, you are candid, you are frank. And we are able to see your interiority in its fullness and richness. I commend this book to all of you because this extraordinary woman takes the reader on a journey. And tonight we are going to engage not in the kind of conversation you have at an ABA conference. We are going to have real talk because this is what you wanted.
Absolutely.
When we talked about this evening.
Absolutely.
This book is a love letter. It is a love letter to your country that you love. It is a love letter to Johnny and Ellery Brown, to Mama Queenie, to Grandma Uzera, to Aunt Carolyn, to Patrick, to Talia and Layla, and to the ancestors who brought you to this moment. I want to begin with something that I found extraordinarily profound in the first chapter. You say, "From the first moment I became conscious of myself, I aspired to be as purposeful as my parents, Johnny and Ellery Brown."
Yes.
What was so purposeful about the way in which Johnny and Ellery Brown raised you?
Well, that's an interesting question. It's one I try to cover in the book. So, to give a little backstory, as I said in my preface beginning, my parents were born in the South, raised in Miami, Florida in the 1950s and 60s. And at that time, there was segregation in housing and transportation and all public services. And what that meant was that African Americans were not allowed by law to participate fully in the society. And when I was born, just 5 years after the Civil Rights Act, the Voting Rights Act, it was like a door opening up for my parents. They said, you know, here's our shot at doing all the things. Now that the world has opened for our daughter, she is going to do all the things that we were not allowed to do. So they were very intentional in their pouring into me that I could do and be anything I wanted, literally, and they knew what it meant to not be able to do and be anything you wanted.
But they told you that.
But they told me that.
And be anything
they
you
told
want.
me that. And one of the things that was one of my key memories growing up was my dad decided to go back to law school. So my parents were public school teachers when I was born in 1970 in Washington, D.C. And they decided, or my dad decided, that he wanted to go to law school. And he got into the University of Miami, and we went back there and we lived on campus at the University of Miami. And so I'm 4 years old, and I'm sitting, you know, across from him, and I remember him studying with his big law books on the table, and I had my coloring books on the table, and you know, and my parents would talk to me, you know, in full sentences, never baby, you know, talk. And my dad would talk to me about the cases that he was reading.
He would talk to you about the law.
He would talk to me about the law. He would say, you know, these people are fighting over this issue, and what do you think? And we would have conversations about it. And it was that kind of thing that my parents felt like This is an opportunity for our daughter to do anything she wants to do, and we are preparing her for the future. We are preparing her to take full advantage of this country and all that it has to offer.
So they clearly were ambitious for you.
Yes, they were, from the very beginning. I talk in the book about, for example, my mother used to enroll me in these little public speaking programs. So if any of you know about youth fairs in certain places, Miami-Dade County has a big youth fair, and you can recite poems, and you can recite speeches, and you can, when I was very little, my mother started enrolling me in those sorts of activities because she wanted me to get out there and use my voice from little.
And clearly the confidence that they had in you
Yes.
inured in some way into your capacity to think about your own potential.
I think that's right, both in me and in African Americans. My parents had a fierce love and, pride in their African Americanness. So much so, and I talk about this in the book, that when I was little, maybe 2 years, 3 years old, they went to Africa for a period of time, 4 6 weeks, to really understand the culture and be in Africa. My aunt, you talked about Aunt Carolyn, was in the Peace Corps in West Africa at the time, and that's actually where my name comes from.
Exactly. So your name,
Yes.
Ketanji Onyika,
Yes.
means
It means lovely one.
lovely one.
Yes. My mother was pregnant, and my aunt was in the Peace Corps, and my mother asked my aunt to bring back, or to give her African names, which was kind of unusual.
It was radical.
It was.
Well, it was radical.
I was-
You talk in the book about how you remember your mother cooking dinner in her dashiki.
Yes.
And
Yes.
you heard her intentionally
Yes.
giving you big afro puffs.
That's right.
And doing your hair
That's right.
with a great sense of awareness and pride.
That's right. My parents had gone to HBCUs, historically black colleges and universities. And they were very intentional about me, my upbringing, giving me pride in myself. They also really, I think, felt that it was going to be important for me to have self-confidence and not look to society for affirmation, because they had lived in a time in which that was not the way in which African Americans were received.
And they clearly understood that at home you needed to get the armor
Yes,
to be resilient in the face of what a young black girl would experience.
that's
in
correct.
society.
That's correct.
And so this young black girl goes out into society and she is a star. She excels at everything she does. All throughout elementary school, junior high school, you get to high school and you are most popular. You are valedictorian. You
No,
are,
not valedictorian.
You are practically
That was
valedictorian.
No, let me tell them, in high school, from Miami Palmetto, my big activity was speech and debate. And I actually was in the speech categories, not the debate categories. And it's really kind of a performative art. My main activity was original oratory, which required me to write a 10-minute speech, memorize it, and then perform it. And I did really well at that.
You excel.
I excelled. I had a coach who also invested in me. My coach really nurtured me. She guided me. She taught me how to reason, how to write. And the more you do something like competitive oratory and you do well, you really do start to develop a sense of, okay, I can do this.
And you had that confidence, and that confidence is what carried you into the world in
Yes.
so many ways. As you think about that time in Miami, because your life fundamentally changed.
Yes.
How did that experience prepare you for the transition to Cambridge, Massachusetts?
Well, I didn't know anything about Cambridge, Massachusetts before getting it heavily involved in debate. I mean, it's like a totally different world up north than, growing up in the South in the way that I did. And as I said, my parents had been public school teachers. My dad went back to law school. He worked, though, in mostly the public sector. He was an attorney for the school board. So he wasn't in law firms or anything like that.
There weren't any black people in law firms.
Not many.
Just
And so, the question was, where was I going to go to college? We didn't do a lot of college tours or anything like that, but debate, we would go to tournaments, and Harvard has a high school debate tournament, and I went a couple of years in a row, and I thought, well, this looks like a decent school. It seemed nice enough, and so I ended up applying there. And it's a funny story that I tell in the book. My grandmother,
we have to talk about it.
My maternal grandmother, who was a saint. I mean, she was just so wonderful. But she too she had grown up in Georgia, moved to Florida, had never really traveled beyond Georgia. Didn't know anything about Harvard. And when I got in, I came to her and I said, Grandma, I'm so excited. I got into Harvard. And she said, oh, Howard, that's such a wonderful school.
We love
And then I said, no, Grandma. I said, I know I had talked to you about Washington, D.C., and I like D.C., but this is in Cambridge, Massachusetts. This is Harvard. And she said, oh, well, I guess that's a perfectly good school, too.
Don't we love our cultural markers?
Exactly.
So the first time I was in the New York Times, I said to my grandmother, I was in the New York Times today. And she said, baby, that's good. When you going to be in the jet? And, she was like, if you are black, you are nobody. You can be informed, you can be important, you can be in the Times until you are in the jet. And she is at the beauty parlor with her girlfriends and she can show them.
Exactly.
No. She and her girlfriends are not reading the New York Times. Just as your grandmother, the aspiration of Howard University.
Oh my gosh, that was what she knew. That was what she knew.
Remains preeminent today.
That's right.
So you get to Cambridge, Massachusetts.
So I get to Cambridge, Massachusetts, and it's, wonderful for the first 2 weeks. I mean, like most freshmen, I am excited to be there. I'm thinking this is a wonderful opportunity. But about 2 weeks in, you start going, what have I got myself into? And especially because I am a September birthday, so some people share that. And if you think back, when you are a freshman and your birthday is like early in September, nobody knows you. And it's usually, for me, it was my 18th birthday, and I'd always spent birthdays with my family, and I was alone, and I was feeling terrible, the worst. Really wondering, did I make the right decision? By that time, my grandmother actually had been diagnosed with breast cancer, and she was going through treatments, and I was away, and it was just very, very hard. And this was a story that I mentioned in my confirmation hearing, and I talk about in the book as well, which is, right before my birthday, during that time period, a woman who I did not know, a black woman, was walking on the path in Harvard Yard as I was walking, and as we crossed, she leaned over and she said, "Persevere." And I was like, what? But after that, a couple days later, I get letters from my mother on my birthday, from my Aunt Carolyn. And my Aunt Carolyn, as I said, was a missionary. And she sends me this letter, which I still have. where she's wishing me a happy birthday, and she says, the Lord, do know that the Lord has angels that he has put around you to guide and protect you. And I thought, I wonder if that woman
Indeed.
was an angel.
Was an angel.
Yeah.
And you write about how isolating it was for you, and how, like a lot of students, but particularly many students of color in predominantly white elite institutions feel a sense of alienation and indeed often unwelcome. And you, though, and maybe it was that armor that you came with, but you, at Harvard, you excelled. You graduated, now I'm going to get this right, magna cum laude.
I was.
You were, and my friend Deborah Rudder mentioned your period as a thespian.
Yes.
So talk about the theater part, because that's something you still have passion for.
I do. I love the theater. I try to go whenever I can. So, I had done speech and debate really, really vigorously in high school, and I decided in college I wanted to do something different. And part of my speech categories, I had different activities that I participated in. There was a dramatic and humorous interpretation category that I entered, and I thought, well, maybe I'll just go into theater. So as an extracurricular. I was a government major, but I performed in, plays, and I was in I was one of the doo-wop girls in Little Shop of Horrors, with Mo Rocca.
Mo Rocca. There's a wonderful photo of you and
Yes.
Mo Rocca.
And people seem to get a kick out of the fact that I also took a drama class with Matt Damon. And we were assigned to be a scene partner in one scene, I remember. And the reason why I remember this in particular is because at that point, he was already kind of a big man on campus in terms of the theater, because he had started working in community theater, and he, so it was like a big deal to be partnered with Matt Damon, And they told me I was better than he was, but
Right. And I bet Matt Damon felt the same way about you. And so here you are at Harvard, and you have friends. You have met the three women
Yes.
who become your lifelong sisters.
My sisters.
And
My sisters.
who in so many ways anchored you
Absolutely.
at Harvard and life beyond. But you were still lonely.
Well,
Because there, as you say in the book, you hadn't had a boyfriend.
I had not. I mean, one of the things that was challenging for me in high school was that, as you said, I was, very good at debate. I was president of my class, so I was popular. But, many friends, but no dates. I was in a predominantly white high school, very high-achieving student, and I guess no one thought of me in that way, or at least that was the way I felt. And so I had sort of resolved that I was just going to do good work, and I was going to be a leader, and, that would be enough. That would be enough.
And then this man named Patrick Jackson
A man named Patrick
was
Jackson.
seated by you in class.
In a very important class. This was my sophomore year and his junior year. He was the year ahead of me, and we were in a class called The Changing Concept of Race in America. And it was sort of like a stadium seating kind of idea in the class, and he would sit behind me, and he would tap me on the shoulder. put his keys on my earrings and, whisper things. What do you think about that? And then eventually we got to be friends. At first I thought he was goofy. It's like,
He sounds you make him sound very goofy in the book. He sounds very goofy in the book.
he would agree with that. And then, we started to develop a friendship after a couple weeks of, sort of interest in this way. And then I noticed that he was in another class, or at least I thought he was in another class of mine. So I had this history class where he was friendly and talkative and talking to me all the time. Then I had a government class where I would lean down the row and wave like this, and he would not respond.
So he was gaslighting.
He was gaslighting me. And I said to my roommates, my sisters, I said, what is going on here? And they were like, oh, you just leave him alone. He's crazy. He's obviously. And I said, well, no, I'm going to confront him. I'm going to confront him on one of the friendly days. So I said, why don't you talk to me in our government class? And he said, I'm not taking a government class. And I said, yes, you are. Yes, you are. Well, it turns out that Patrick Jackson has an identical twin brother. who is here tonight, by the way. Both of them are here tonight.
Give it up for the Jackson brothers. And can we say, had I been an observer to the class, the subject, and the name Patrick Jackson, I would have thought he was a brother. So there was something else about Patrick Jackson.
There was something else about Patrick Jackson.
That was different.
Patrick Jackson was such a good friend of mine for the entire year. And I kind of started to like him, as I talk about in the book. We studied together, we took another class together, and I didn't want anybody to know I liked him. I certainly didn't tell him, because again, I had sort of decided that people didn't like me in that way, and I wasn't gonna put myself out there to get hurt, so,
which a lot of women and gay men can relate to. So you were just like, no, I'm not even going there.
Well, it came to a head. It came to a head because at the end of my sophomore year, the very last day before going home for the summer, Patrick is from the Boston area, which is not far from Harvard, and he and his family have this wonderful vacation house that they go to not far from their house, and he invited me to come. And I thought, he's my friend, we've been talking, so we were just gonna go. But the whole time I'm thinking, is this a date? No, I'm on a date. I was so nervous because I thought, well, maybe we're on a date, maybe not.
And he didn't say, we're on a date.
No, he just said, do you want to come see the house that I've been telling you about? It's near the water, we could see. And I said, okay, why not? But the whole time I'm thinking, oh, maybe we're on a date, but nothing happens. We're together the whole day. He doesn't try to hold my hand. He doesn't do anything. So then I'm like upset.
You are.
I'm like upset.
Because you been punked. He had brought you up, you had all of this, and then.
Yes, I had thought, well, if this is a date, then obviously we're here in the house. There's no one else around. This would be the moment.
Something's supposed to be happening.
Yes.
I mean, you were like, I have not had a boyfriend, but I know something is supposed to be happening here. Right?
Exactly, and nothing does. And I'm like wanting to go home by the end of it. I'm like, so he says, I plan to make dinner at my parents' house. So why don't I take you there, we'll have dinner, and then I'll take you back to the dorm. So I'm like, okay, but I'm kind of mad now because I'm like, clearly
Sure you are.
He doesn't like me and I just want to go home.
Right.
Okay, I just want to go home. So I agree to this dinner. I meet his parents who are lovely, but again, he's just making the dinner, and so dinner's over, and he says, well, if you want to, we can watch a movie.
Okay, all right.
You know, we can watch a movie. He says we can watch a movie, so I'm like, okay, you know, but still, I've now purposed in my mind, this is going nowhere, and I just need to get home and finish packing. And we're sitting on the couch, and he puts the movie in, and he goes,
Go, Patrick, okay. So then what happened?
But now, because I have this mindset, I jump up.
What?
I jump up and I say no.
What?
I say no.
You're supposed to jump on, not up. What?
No.
You didn't?
No.
So what did you do?
So I jumped up and I said no. And he's like, what? And I said, I just don't want to be hurt. I said, I just don't want to be hurt. And he turned and he said, Ketanji, I will never hurt you. I love you.
Oh. Okay, wait.
That's in the book.
No. Okay, somebody got to find a spotlight and put it on Patrick. No, you say this in the book.
That's right. That's exactly what happened.
And then
we dated for almost 7 years before we got married. And we have been married in October, it'll be 28 years.
And the story, though, it's such a beautiful story, the journey you both went on, because
Yes.
he, like you, in the field of medicine, was already on his way to being a rock star.
Yes.
And goes forward into medical school at Columbia and on to Mass General and has this amazing career. And the two of you, as you talk about your journey together, those early years,
Yes.
which were not easy.
No.
You talk about my student loans. Mm-hmm. I mean, you talk about things that are real, but at the same time, there had to be something disorienting because you married a man whose family came over on the Mayflower.
I did.
And so,
I did. I mean, that's the other.
seventh generation Harvard.
Seventh generation Harvard, and yeah, I mean, it was a real different world that I was entering, that I was not familiar with at all. I talk about in the book,
Yeah.
and it was complicated as we got to be closer and closer in our relationships, and we sort of felt like this was going somewhere, to kind of talk with our parents and help them to understand where we were, my parents especially.
Well, and I love the line in here when you tell your family, it sounds like, guess who's coming to dinner? Because at one point, your father is like, oh, hell no.
Well,
he was worried about you.
He was worried about me, and he had, they understood that Patrick had been my friend, my mother had met him, they understood that we loved each other, but my dad says, but it's not about necessarily just the feelings that the two of you have, this is about America. And, he had a point back then. I mean, this was 30-something years ago. And we worked through it and stayed together, got together, and it's been wonderful. But
well, and Patrick, I mean, talk about persist. Patrick persisted.
Patrick persisted.
From what you write in here, Brother Patrick persisted.
He did.
He was going to marry you.
He was going to marry me, and there's a part where I talk about how different our backgrounds were and how kind of nervous I was about it. And one of the stories is Patrick's grandmother had promised to pay for his medical school, totally independent. I never met her. And I was worried for no reason. I mean, I didn't know anything about his grandmother, but I was worried that if she found out that he was dating a black woman, maybe she wouldn't do it. I don't know why I thought that, but I just
Because we grew up in the South.
Because we grew up. I was like, "Are you sure this is good?" And he, at that point, we were writing letters. He used to write me the best letters.
I know. That's a good letter.
And he wrote a letter where he said, you know, even if I have to take a job, even if I have to do, you know, something else, I choose you. I will always.
Okay, you know what? Y'all gotta find the spotlight. I mean, this is. Wow, we need a gay Patrick in our lives. Darn, wow. Amazing. So let's go forward and talk about how you are married. And I love how your wedding, the photos are so great because you truly merge.
We merge.
These very kind of Boston Brahmin people doing the electric slide. Which the photo.
One of my favorite memories is of my mother-in-law being taught how to do the electric slide by my roommates, my sisters. It's fabulous.
The photos are great. The photos are truly special. But you start that journey.
Yes.
And that journey led you, of course, to 3 federal clerkships.
Yes.
You, of course, at Harvard Law School or Law Review, again, graduating with honors. And everyone knew that Ketanji Brown was destined for greatness. And you, in some ways, were on a fast track. And you decide that it's time to start a family. And you are working at one of the most prestigious law firms in America in Boston. And it would be a most enviable position to be in. And you have your first child, your daughter, Tali. Talk about, as you do so powerfully in the book, of your anguish and sadness and the complexity associated with being a new mother and an associate at a law firm with people who expected you to live the law.
Yeah, it was very, very challenging. And I know many women in particular have these kinds of struggles when you are a professional, you're in an environment that really is requiring a lot of you in terms of time and attention. And in fact, that was really my professional brand. It was how I saw myself as being the kind of worker who was the first one in and the last one out, and that was who I was as a professional. And then I have this beautiful baby, and I'm torn because I feel like I can't do what I want to do professionally, give it the time and attention that I had previously given it and that I like to work in this way. Nor could I give this baby, if I was doing this job the way it was supposed to be done, the attention that she deserved. And it was very much like an identity crisis for me that I talk about. And then just the practicalities of it. You know, Patrick was in residency. Patrick went on to be a fantastic, as you say, surgeon, and he was training at this time. And that meant that he couldn't really be counted upon to be able to relieve the nanny or do whatever because he had his responsibilities. And so I had to leave the office at 5:30 every day, 5 o'clock every day, and that was really, really hard for me as an associate.
Well, it was because you were such an overachiever. And
Yes.
the challenge for women who are overachievers is that you feel the necessity of overachieving at everything. And it's one of the realities of this
Yes.
question for women of of your generation who on some levels have been told you can have it all. And I think what you were finding out was that you couldn't have it all
Not all at the same
at
time.
the same time.
Not all at the same time. Yeah, you really do have to figure out how to manage. And I mean, I only ended up being able to manage because Patrick is such a wonderful partner, and we worked through a way in which there were times in which his career really needed to be at the forefront. He needed to do his residency training, for example, and so then I did more of the caregiving. And then there were times when my career needed to be fronted, when I was clerking for the Supreme Court, for example, or when I was, maybe even today, now with the things that I'm doing. So there's a lot of give and take and partnership in our relationship.
And it's just the reality of the challenges of modern parenting.
Yes.
And then on top of it, the complexity of race.
The complexity of race.
Still
Yes.
is a complicating factor.
Yes.
For parenting and for children.
And for being a professional in the workplace. I talk about how, there were many times in my law firm life in which I felt like I really want to bring my Harvard diplomas into this meeting right now, because when I say something, it's not clear that people are taking me seriously.
Or you say how somebody restated what you said.
Yes.
And they
Yes.
were validated for saying what you said in the first place.
Yes, exactly.
You also talk about you are fresh off of a clerkship with the United States Supreme Court, and you are in the copy room, and a partner in the firm presumes you to be an assistant, a secretary, and that was not an irregular
No,
experience.
it's not an irregular experience, especially back then.
And so how does one, because I'm still trying to learn this myself, so help me. How does one, when you are black and brilliant and talented, maintain a level of equanimity and not be enraged
Yes.
by what you encounter?
Yes. Well, I think this is something that I learned in part from my parents and their experience. One of the things that I saw growing up is here you had extremely talented people who had been limited in their prospects because of the way our society operated, and it would have been easy for them to be enraged and not able to function. And you learn how to when to exercise your voice and when not. So I talk as well about an incident that happened in college, going back a little bit, where there was a student in our area of the quad, the place where we lived, who decided that he was going to hang a Confederate flag up in the window out in the quad. And it was very enraging for the African American students in particular on campus. The Black Students Association got into gear, and we're protesting and we're doing all of these things. And as well we should. But I noticed, and others noticed, that, people were not necessarily going to classes regularly, not because they're spending so much time focusing on this. And it reminded me, as I talk in the book, of a quote from Toni Morrison, who says, the very real function of racism is distraction. And that, therefore, it is important to do what you need to do in terms of speaking out, but also keep yourself focused on what it is you really need to be doing in that moment. So, in the copy room, sometimes you just say, no, I'm an associate, before you turn and walk out. But you have to figure out when it's worth taking your eyes off what it is that you're supposed to be doing and address it.
And it was clear that you had your eye on the prize.
Yeah.
And you understood what would be your journey and your ultimate payoff. And so I want to talk to you about how it feels to be an icon. Again, you don't like hearing this, but you must hear it in this moment. Because what it does mean, it's not just that you are an icon, you are a black woman who, because the narrative of black excellence and black genius has been so contested in this country's history, going back to Phyllis Wheatley, who was forced to write her poems in front of a group of white men to prove, because it was simply unbelievable that a black woman could produce this kind of beauty. How do you manage to be present in that reality of who you must be? You must be KBJ. You have to turn up as Justice Jackson. And part of that is performative. And how do you calibrate? Because you write in the book, we are a private family. I am a private person. And yet here you are, probably among the most prominent and well-known women, and certainly black women in America.
It's an interesting question. I don't know how I do it. You keep putting one foot in front of the other. You understand how many people supported you. You understand that you're standing on the shoulders of people who never had this opportunity. I said that in the White House speech, the South Lawn speech, that I was carried on, the backs of people who had diminished opportunity in the past. And I think that gives me a sort of feeling that I have to keep going. I have to be showing up in this moment, because I feel so grateful to be this person. I've said a couple times in other forums, I am the first black woman who is seated on the Supreme Court, but not the first black woman who could have done this job. I think in particular about Constance Baker Motley, who was such an inspiration to me. I talk about discovering her story as a middle schooler because we share a birthday, and I was alerted to the fact that she was a judge, and I had known about the law from my father, but here was this woman doing something, exciting as a judge, and that was sort of in my mind. Constance Baker Motley argued something like 11 cases in the Supreme Court and won 10 of them. She was unbelievable, and yet she grew up in a time where she really did not have the opportunity to sit on the Supreme Court. And so I'm just so grateful to have been born when I was born, to the people who nourished me, who nurtured me, and gave me the chance to do this. And so that, I think, really helps me keep going.
So I want to talk about a really poignant and endearing moment that you write about, and that is, first, you and Patrick have been, clearly just are madly in love with your girls, because you talk about parenting, and you talk about you just do your best, and all of a sudden, they turn out to be great kids. But your journey to the Supreme Court really begins with a letter from one Layla Jackson, who writes to President Obama and says, basically, you need to appoint my mother to the Supreme Court. She literally says, I, her daughter, Layla Jackson, of 11 years old, strongly believes she would be an excellent fit for the position. That is so endearing.
It was so endearing, and it was a moment in which Patrick and I both sort of realized for almost the first time that we were raising a kid who was assertive, who would speak her mind to the President of the United States, and who really appreciated me in a way that I had not seen before. That we must have done something right. You know, I was the mom who brought the baked goods from the store and didn't make them. And you go through your life feeling like I'm not doing enough, in terms of supporting your kid. And so to have my kid endorse me to the President of the United States was just amazing. It was amazing.
It would be amazing because there are a lot of kids who would not endorse their parents to anybody, much less the president. So kudos to you and Patrick. But I do want to move forward then to a really another poignant moment in the book, and this is the part of the journey where it becomes clear that President Biden is interested in nominating you to succeed Justice Breyer, your mentor. And on some levels, it was a call to question moment for your family, because you say to everyone, okay, folks, if this goes forward, like all bets off, our business is going to be everywhere. Mm-hmm. And there was some concern, but everybody rallied.
Everybody rallied. There really did need to be a moment where we thought, okay, are we all in for this journey? And this was right before, Justice Breyer had announced he was stepping down, and within, a week or so, I got a call from the White House saying, we are vetting you and some other people for potential nomination. And I knew from my prior experiences being nominated to judicial posts that if I didn't want to do it, I needed to speak up. I needed to tell them. And there was a chance that I wouldn't do it because there was so much scrutiny on the Supreme Court. And I just didn't know whether all of our family business should be let out in this way, whether everybody was comfortable with it.
And then you receive a phone call. Your cell phone rings. Judge Jackson, this is Joe Biden. How are you? You say, I am wonderful. How are you, Mr. President? He says, well, you're going to be more wonderful now. I'd like you to go to the Supreme Court. How about that? You get off the phone with the President of the United States, and one Patrick says, I believed all along it would be you. I, Ketanji, have been absolutely convinced this was your path for a long time.
And that's true. That is true. So when we moved to Washington, D.C., about 20 years before that very incident, Patrick could have had the opportunity to stay in Boston because he had trained at a hospital in Boston. And he told the person who was doing the hiring, oh no, I have to live in Washington, D.C. because my wife is going to sit on the Supreme Court one day.
And so as we wrap here, I have to say the epilogue, which opens, "This is my life now. I walk daily along marble corridors where few African Americans have ever been, much less worked." And you make it very clear that you are ready. You were prepared when called, and that there is no imposter syndrome. There is no am I worthy. There is no that indeed you have earned. Yes, you are grateful. Yes, you are thankful. Yes, you are prayerful. But you have earned the appointment to the United States Supreme Court. Please join me in thanking this extraordinary woman. You have to sit.
Thank you.